clinical statistics. Is defined as a certain body and methods for learning all the many cases with all their equipment where everything is set in form of numbers, measurement, variations in regards of individuals. But because there are so many qualities as alive or dead, which improved or worst in male or females, usually all this data is presented as counts, rates, or proportions. In this way, the scope of statistical reasoning is really broad. But because the scientific investigations finds these problems of so many amounts of qualities, so many details related male or females, some that they improve, some at the worst. The solution was to present statistics where the problem and the method solutions improved or work in where all the readers and research groups were able to understand and report results required an understanding, and this solution was the statistical issues. And in this way, the investigator were able to address different kinds of issues. In many clinical studies in which statistical issues came up as an important statistical concept, many different types of studies were applied. So the idea of this chapters is to learn this broad concept, especially for getting into the operational definition. Following, like most of the investigations, same broad pattern. Investigators imposed one or more treatments on a subject some kind of illness, and then observes and compares the outcomes, and then reach out conclusions and how and what kind of effect the treatments got into the subject of a certain kind. The study of a such meaning grows out, and the answer to provide in regards of what to do with the patient. And for this, must faithfully reflect the procedure used in the study, and it has to be precise and specific. In terms of description, describing the terms, it says over here the laboratory investigations reports includes specific equipment, procedures, and materials. A case through a clinical investigation. And when a patient stays to be ill, whether stage 1 or 3, where it really has to be found what is really happening from the concern of the patient demanding to stay on a stage 2 or 3. Because it is important to know how that diagnosis was made to have placed the patient on a stage 3 or 2. The criteria that was applied, how the patient was assessed, and the staging. Which person, which team or committee the measurements that presented the characteristics in which one thing might look like the other one, such a cardiac output with the word angiography required, or the presence of blood gases, including the blood pressure, what kind of cough might produce different kinds of measurements with respect to this diagnosis or assessment, depending of which device was used during that time versus the rest of the patients with the same assessments with that device. The treatments usually in which operational apply carefully, which allow define the differentiations in between, even as subtle distinctions made in between them, which medications, which drugs were given, and which method by mouth and a syrup also includes a syrup, including the type of medication. And what was the medication which made a series of deaths, such as in the early days of sulfanilamide treatments, which tragically arrest patients. To check into a medication usually used or actually used from the medication that it was prescribed, but some of them are sold out as generic and from different kinds of laboratories, such as analgesic pills, has both active ingredients and function as a placebo to relieve the patient's pain, right? The procedures and visits to doctors, whether it was given by a pharmaceutical authority or a doctor, right? And where the effect will be caused by the time the person was ill. Or to be able to find out what kind of control, what kind of treatment was applied, what operational design was advising the patient to move on into. The phases in study comparative trial treatments typically comprises different phases following one from each other. If the patient is eligible for study, if the patient enters into the study, if it's assigned for treatment to care itself, evaluating the patient's outcomes, and writing it down, getting the data to analyze, to become part of statistics from all the patients, and then the fair comparison of treatments gets to be applied to the same research. Otherwise, it's going to be difficult to determine which part or to have a lot of information in regards to so many patients will be very difficult to make a precise statistics, right? So it has to be mostly from the same kind of illness. So following, right, this decision to enroll each patient in the trial is going to be done with the knowledge that the treatment that will be for the first one is going to be the same treatment for the second one. Then the opportunity for constructing these treatments for groups will be better. So for one treatment, there will be a group of patients, and for another trial with another treatment, there will be another amount of patients. And with the treatment the patients receive, then another potential source of bias exists. The periods for different treatments might conceal mortality or longevity, and to take advantage of the treatments or the other. So by planning the steps to have patients eligible for the study, the treatments have to be assigned under medical care for evaluation of outcomes, preventing contamination through all the phases. So the investigations, which is promoted treatment, and where the observation has to be constant in different groups. Then it will be a little bit difficult because the different groups. So the record to have in the statistics might not have all the information sufficient for the operational definition for crucial matters. The conclusion of the study will be resting in assumptions or hypotheses about undefined terms and procedures. Still is going to be accepted along with the data when the patients are screened and observed, concluding adequately and very well defined. The integrity of operational definitions lead investigators, which will take it seriously, will be important, and will then take the precautions in well-conducted studies where The identifications of disease stages and laboratory analysis might be important. Sample of studies can always be checked against clinical records or records that are from studies with same names. Visits and audits are important because these are charged with responsibility to control the quality in a routinely manner, conducting multi-center studies to ensure the proper operational definitions of patients, treatments, applied, evaluating the outcomes, and record keeping the results along with the methods. By studying cases, the planning phase brings up the answer of what the student or the researcher learned from unlimited amount of data contained and obtained by planning and considerations can improve to clarify issues, to make analysis of procedures in many cases. The appropriate subjects, the controls, and the data. Medical students in the past were used as volunteers in hospitals, clinics, ministries, in jails, orphanages, private groups, to make assessments and to get to know and to investigate the side effects from prospective drugs intending to treat disease affecting elderly population. And then this will provide, and we're providing unlimited data to provide statistics from very old, 25 years old and plus, and we'll talk about the incidents which jail the use of certain drugs, right, from 70 years old, who also takes the same medication. And that's how all this data begin to be collected, which means that all the medication has the story, their data, the statistics, along with the age of all the patients. The importance of this, it was the little changes had to be done from one age to another one. And this data was able to clarify what group of subjects eventually was appropriate for the studies of research. The appropriate controls promising methods, directly dissolving, clothing patients during first 2 hours after a heart attack was studied. And then proponing to apply a new method to eligible patients to use as control patients who arrive more than 2 hours but less than 8 hours after a heart attack. Groups will receive a standard therapy. Many data gathered in this concern help to resolve if it was better to receive new therapy with 2 hours or standard therapy after 2 hours. And then large studies provide the information in the and it really depends of the physical condition of the patient, whether to use a new method or use the standard one. Limits of association. A study which requires the observation to collect infinite data was able to demonstrate in the presence of association between two variables, such as lung cancer and smoking. But it doesn't resolve which cause and which effect was the problem with the cancer in the lung. It was just the association lung cancer and smoking. Extensive studies of adults, men, with a strong positive association between height and weight and between girth and weight. And then supporting the proposition that by increasing the weight of a man will increase his girth, but not his height. Finding out the cause and the effect demands recourse to knowledge depending of a particular study. When the experiment is taking up, treatments are given. Checking events that are followed, procedures causing inference directly dependent of outside knowledge. The point of this is that the experiment where subjects are given large drinks of whiskey or water, rum and water, brandy and water, and are showing signs of intoxication, it is outside knowledge, known as outside knowledge, supporting the conclusion that the effect was due to the alcohol nor the water. The confounding variable, time elapsing after a heart attack, and the methods of therapy were confounded. In a study appearing in a pattern, the separate effect cannot be distinguished. When a personal choice of a patient, or physician, or other participant the polio vaccine trial, which is the study on 2 million children, is the study, the incidence of polio was clearly lower among unvaccinated children whose parents decided not to give the vaccine than in between children who received the placebo after the parents give permission. Differences in between families were able to see those who gave permissions from the ones who decided not to give the shot were susceptible to poliomyelitis eventually. We also see that studies with golofibrate subjects took 80% or more of the prescribed dose, that it had substantially lowered the mortality than subject with poorer drug compliance. and this indicates that the drug was beneficial. But the difference in mortality was observed between high and low compliance subjects whose medication was the placebo. A matter of personal choice was a drug compliance for some reason related to mortality in patients in the study. The confounding between the quality of the drug taken related to survival probably went unnoticed. More drug, lower mortality, therefore the drug is beneficial. The patterns of data acquisition. Observing and studying a certain amount of people, maybe 1,000, will differ greatly in their personal information from one and another one. In relation with chronic diseases, were found 100 subjects for 10 years, right? And if 100 subjects had chronic diseases, 1,000 of them can be able to study on their chronic diseases for 1 year. And it's better to find 1,000 patients to study through the entire year on their chronic diseases, right? And under the acute disease, where the disease can be reversed easily, right? Because the chronic disease is already an assessed disease. Then acute disease is something that is being barely found and it can be reversed. 120 observations in laboratory studies where 24 animals given 5 doses each of a drug, 40 animals given 3 doses each, and so. From each animal, 1, 2, 3 tissues from them might be taken. And these are talking in regards of chronic disease, which are the same animal with the same chronic disease, and the animals are given doses, some of them a little bit, some of them a little bit more, and then they take off the tissue in order to analyze the effects of it to see if the chemicals found on the chronic disease are actually better or worse through the portions of doses on those animals. There's several ways in which the final study can be practiced, provides a lot of data for many case studies. And so the techniques, right, can become part of designs and statistical experiments, and that kinds of information is important to know, right? and whatever cost this research can have from earlier related studies. And exhausting experiences providing infinite data on case studies and what can be learned from the infinite large amount of studies of the cases. The question is what could be learned by exhausting experience of that kind, the study with samples, right? And it talks about the sometimes this kind of exhaustion will involve only a finite set of data. Opinions from pediatricians in the United States confidentially furnish contraceptive information for teenagers, not to an infinite data case, but to the finite collection regards of the opinion of all pediatricians in the country in regards to this topic. And in regards to the concern about the special cases, all the possible data that it can be given in regards to cases, and where some of the writers of statistics use the term population to be able to get ideas and discussed on the rubric on infinite data case by case. Trouble arises illustrating by following examples in regards to motorcycle accidents, fatalities, helmets, laws, where the state by law doesn't require helmets. And by then, because the result of this were hits in the head and problems with the head, and eventually mental illness after the enactment of a helmet, there were less problems. And this is a type of statistics of it should be regarded itself exhausting experience. Most statisticians will say the deaths observed in these periods will be random outcomes of probabilistic processes and happen related brief peaks of processes. The day rate observed, the level of risk in that period but people in many cases were not thinking on the consequences. That's how any of them as a any of them becomes or have been observed indicates that the level of risk most doubt will reflect a risk itself. Um, the long periods might learn the relationship between helmet law and the risk of motorcycle accident death. The finite data tells about the infinite data case and about the actual risk and the periods that they were observed. Probabilistic thinking. Unpredictable variations, annoyingly large. Probabilistic thinking it comes handy. The laws of physics, elaborate instrumentation to use and to treat and to provide results in regards of a condition of dying, and then determine the matter, a reason, and practically our level of analysis makes it look as an outcome and a chance matter to be regarded as probabilistic. Given the sample of two patients which has the same disease, probably they will present two different outcomes. Probably under the principle of determination, but our level of analysis is still probabilistic. With infinite number of observations, we will learn in the problem with the reasons of death, the probabilities that it will come to rest. These probabilities will be on few numbers because we'll present complication. The infinite data will show probabilities of more and complex kinds of outcomes, and will provide two diagnosis tests A and B then the outcomes measured are survival to 1 year of death through the same period. The infinite data case will provide information during the questions of whatever happened, right? The probability of survival to 1 year for patients with an A will have a sub number A1 to the A, and probably a sub number 2 to the same A, and it will provide a score between B sub number 1 and B sub number 2, and will provide variables under the study. Possibilities will raise as present complex issues. The finite data can best provide better answer to questions precisely after providing the infinite data set, objective, probabilistic, giving a thought to appreciate the closeness of the approximation by making understandable the finite data to be appraised, focusing not just in the probability distribution, but particular to the aspect that presented in the problem, and then to have a more concrete idea to especially think in the elements to provide to the probabilistic. The sample mean and standard deviation. Statistics is a number computed from the observation in a sample. A sample is and tells about general size of the sample's observation. Different samples drawn from the same data, somehow different sample means, must be thought of an only probabilistic approximation of the mean that will be found if infinite data totally in the case could be examined. And the sample means approximately the infinite data mean is a major concern of probabilistic thinking. The standard deviation is a statistic that describes the degree of variation in between the individual observation in the sample. If all have the same characteristics, the same values, the standard deviation will be 0. For farther apart from one to another, the individual observation becomes the standard deviation the large standard deviation. If the standard deviation of a sample is too small, the sample average very closely will represent every individual value. A large standard deviation will tell that this is not so. Presenting a general rule, randomly samples have a small standard deviation. The samples are more likely to be close to all data means and than when the standard deviations are large. The random variation is a mathematical fact that in all cases of practical interest, the differences among random samples of sizes such as M from a single population tend to be smaller when the M is greater. Many important sample statistics from random samples increase similar with a little bit more larger sample sizes. The bias. In regards of our observation, use one instrument and is out of adjustment so that all reading must be reduced by 4. Then our data have a bias of +4 units. A large size will not be able to increase and will not be able to decrease this bias. And with large samples, this bias will stand out. A numerical fact which is given more like no sampling error. Thinking of bias as if it were a numerical discrepancy between the mean of our intended infinite data case and the mean for our actual infinite data case. Obviously, no one will intend to use an instrument that provides reading 4 units too large. But if that happens, then the actual infinite data case will incorporate this bias, and the sample V data will approximate the bias figure. And bias probably could be the most difficult problem in quantitative research. Entering a study in subtle ways. There are so many articles written in regards to this subject affecting the research and the clinical field. The use of treatment and control groups can sometimes help if the reading are 4 units too large. The difference, the means for the treatment group and the mean for the controls, the bias will cancel out. And if the treatment group measurements were made on instruments, right, like instruments number 5 group and the control group's measurements on instruments number 7 group, any instrument's bias will be confounded with treatment. Then the large sample size will not reduce this bias. Bias cannot be talked in regards of whatever equipment, but the follow-ups. Therefore, identification of disease stages, treatments, history taken, record keeping, and patients' responses becomes what is more important. Alertness on the part of the investigatory and symmetry between treatment groups in all operational respects are the most important things to work out bias. Bias must be found in planning the study, right, and execution, and the analysis of data. The induction knowing from experience carries with ideas and experiences comes from a set of instances and learning to be applied to other instances. Probabilistic thinking helps approach these problems, possibly to find out if a sample of L individuals from a population in a way every possibly sample from a size L has the same probability of being chosen. This is called a simple random sample. The laws of probability are directly applicable and enable making the definite statements and whole populations basis of statistics computed from a random sample who have drawn. First, they necessarily take probabilistic form, right? The population mean lies and whatever measurements, right? And the population means is negative if that is other forms for statistical statements inference will exist, including numerical statements, population, infinite data cases, and qualifications, or degree of confidence which the statement can be made. And on the other hand, the inferences depends for their integrity on the actual imposition of probabilistic mechanism. The mechanical properties provide the inference. If the treatment groups have not been constructed randomly, the subjects of a single group, eligible patients, have simply declared comparable by investigator. But must still go through motion of statistic methods. In conclusion, no longer logical consequences of this law of probability. Still, they are less direct, dependent on the hook assumptions, and altogether less reliable. the inference from a probability sample. The surveys of a National Center of Health Statistics provides an example of probability reasoning from a finite sample, where 40,000 households annually, and to the whole population of the United States. And this was a survey using probability sampling, which is a modest amount of random sampling, and where all possibly samples or sizes have known but not equal. The probability of being drowned, and the statistics analysis uses that information. It could be subdivided, for instance, into males and females, smokers and non-smokers. These samples will be random or probability samples of males in the population, of the females, and so on and so on. Comparison of different treated groups as found. Often, inferences in statistical studies are attempted under circumstances that adverse. Comparing subsamples of a random sample from a population. Results of therapies used in recent years compared with results from therapy used earlier. Operations. Number one, applying hospital A's compared with results of operations 2 applied to hospital B. Talking about inferences is difficult in such cases. Many influential interfering many causes be systematically different in population furnishing the data. Principles and difficulties could be reduced, eliminated, carrying out 3 steps: identifying interfering variables, finding the values of these variables, and adjusting the values of these inferring variables appropriately. Investigators have an effective grip by 3 steps: induce, identifying the interfering variables alone, right, and more likely to be more complex issue. It's better than operation 2, and by making measurements to find values really complicated, are really putting the study in jeopardy, increasing the cost, and multiplying the opportunities for error, and adjusting for interfering variables depending on the external information which is not available. Successfully carrying through the 3 steps likely to be feasible, hence valid comparisons, because groups are treated differently, and this makes everything typically difficult though sometimes possible. Comparing treatments in randomly constituent groups, let us take a look at it, right? Let us just get a glance at the internal and external validity. Let us get into the study design. We are going to say that statistical considerations merit attention at the same time that the study has to be planned thoroughly. Inevitably, as much as possible, take in consideration the claims attending at the time of analysis. 4 issues deserve particular care: preventing bias, ensuring efficiency, high information yield per observation, ensuring the integrity of the process, to have certain quality control, and determining the size of the sample. The prevention of bias requires which interferes and identify as much as possible all these variables and then ensuring their uncontrolled effects that will not favor the treatment or another. Choose variables must first be listed. All these variables on the list can be cooked because its effects can be controlled. For example, design might call for equal age distribution in different groups which receive treatment, and where the effect can be symmetrically through randomization, which might or not be followed by certain adjustments that it had to be checked down statistically, perhaps by regression methods. And this is to prevent the influential variable from becoming confounded with the effect of treatment. The efficiency, a subfield of statistics called statistical design of experiments, are large devoted to devising ways to collect data that reduce statistical variations. It says that one device exploits knowledge about interfering variables and applying regression methods. And it says over here that is the concept of analysis of covariance. Another similar subject of the eligible population within which compare treatments, comparison treatments, identical twins epitomizes the approach. Crossover designs further using treatments in every subject result might be invalid if certain conditions do not apply to the physiologic process under study. Statistics and its design of experiments has other devices, right, as well, and might produce economy in time, money, and other resources. Integrity of the process. To be sure the operational definition really applies in the data collection process is important to succeed in the studies. The process of operational definition discussed priorly must be planned, and its execution is required to be provided for in the study protocol. Let us take a look at the sample size in your book, and let us just found out about statistical reporting. Take a look and read your reference if you still have a question in all this information, so you can get into a group of students to solve some of the objectives that are given to you. The use of statistical analysis, right? A sort of statistical methods used to research and to report, right, whether treatments and drugs were reversible or cause death, right, are usually reported at official agencies, very well known by everybody, right? And the additions of these tables of statistics provides the access to maybe 73% of many articles written by people who were analyzing and on the research for drugs and treatments. This statistics methods gradually increases the percent of accessible articles. The study, which is reported, frequently use statistical techniques in a journal to analyze some of the questionable issues, and the knowledge of elementary statistical techniques, chi-squares, t-tests, analysis, assist readers in understanding how the statistical is composed, and their articles are there for to be checked out. The techniques that are used more often could be profitable for many people to know, because the background of the readers and the information given aiding clinicians and medical investigators which continue with their own education, as well as persons designing courses in biostatistics or physicians which are interested in reporting some of their studies to become part of the statistical components and contents of all the research which are sent into as a way of articles in the journals, right, in any districts. Methods of studies, categories of statistics, quality controls, original articles, analysis and techniques used, discussions, right? And the designs, which are some of the most important things that are to talk about in the clinical trials as using patients in medical treatments to be able to compare from group to group and to be able to make reports and identify prognostics factors and other than just treatments, and randomly making it look right, to be able to make charts and tables where people can be easily identify what's going on. There are some samples of such as parallel comparison. Let us take a look at all these definitions, right? Because all this is very important for you to find treatments and medications that are suitable for your patients in the future. And then we see stratified analysis based on covariables, right? And adjustments, modelings, right? Covariates in a general approach that includes adjustment as a special case by constructing and validating mathematical models that affect covariance and outcome. The investigator can remove the effects of covariance from observed results. And let us take a look at all this. You will be able to find, and actually in your book, take a look at the charts, right? And their relations tables that are in between risk factors and incidences of illness. We are talking in regards of parallel comparisons, right? Comparisons of methods of covariate controls and the generalizing results of on these kinds of. Don't forget to read your conclusions, which are very interesting, right? Because over this, it will provide you a better understanding in what we are working on in today's medical statistics. 1, 2.